Considering how much crap people give this movie, it honestly isn't that bad, Mark said as he took another sip of his beer. His wife Claire took another fistful of popcorn from her bowl. Just you wait, this is one of my favorite parts coming up. In the next scene, a boy wearing a pumpkin mask watched as a flashing jack-o'-lantern on television while a silly theme played in the background. Just as the mask began to rot and the kid fell to the floor, Claire had heard the doorbell ring. She grunted with disappointment and set the bowl of popcorn down on the coffee table. Right when we were getting to one of the best scenes, she said with a slight hint of disappointment in her voice. Claire stood up from her couch, walked towards the front door. While doing so, she grabbed a bowl of candy from her kitchen counter, as well as her witch hat. She placed a cheap cone on her head and made sure it was lopsided. Then she walked down the foyer. She could hear her husband's laughter, bellowing as the sound of snakes and bugs swarming blared out the system. As soon as she opened the front door, she was greeted with the delightful, high-pitched screams of small children. "Trick or treat!" they all yelled in illusion at an ear-piercing pitch. "Oh my, aren't you a scary little bunch!" Susan exclaimed while handing out the bowl in front of them. She allowed each kid to take 2 pieces. Most of them went for the good stuff, like Snickers and Reese's. Just as expected, none of the children went for the almond joys that had come in the variety bag. She didn't really mind, however. They were her favorite, and it meant more for her at the end of the night. "Stay safe out there, children, and please be careful. This is a busy street, so watch out for any cars." "Yes, ma'am," the group retorted, while turning around and heading down the cobblestone path that snaked through her yard. One child, covered in zombie makeup, turned his head and ran and yelled, "Thank you!" Claire smiled and waved goodbye to the children as they ran down her driveway into the sidewalk. As she watched them take off towards the next house, she caught a sight of her neighborhood walking across the street. The two exchanged a friendly wave. The woman and her daughter glanced up and down and the street before running across it and up to Claire's front door. "Happy Halloween, Margaret," Claire said, while holding out her candy bowl for her daughter. "You know I've been looking all up and down the street looking for you. I'm guessing Mark went out with Tommy tonight?" Margaret's daughter, Elizabeth, shuffled through the candy bowl in an attempt to find out one would satisfy her cravings. "Tommy actually went out with some friends from school. He was begging all of us all month to do it. It was a little skeptical I was at first, but Mark was the one who pointed out that we need to let him off leash a little bit. We came to a compromise that he couldn't go just past Jefferson Street." Elizabeth squealed with delight as she finally found a Twix bar among with the pieces of candy. She placed it in her bag and then went back to scavenging through the bowl for another one. "We also put a tracker app on his phone just to make sure he listens. He's never really been a problem with this sort of thing, but I just wanted to be safe." They both looked down as Elizabeth made it known to the world that she had found 2 more Twix bars. "The 2 of us just need to get going. If we need to see Tommy anywhere he's not supposed to, I'll be sure to give you a call." The 2 women hugged, and Margaret took her daughter by the hand as they walked down the driveway and onto the sidewalk. Claire looked up with a smile. The 2 of them passed in the front of her house and further down the street. Just as Claire was stepping back inside, she caught a sight of something in her neighbor's yard. A child stood near the edge of the grass. Claire guessed that he was about 10 years old from his size, but his small frame was covered in a pair of dark blue coveralls that were easily in 2 sizes too big. His face was hidden by a Michael Myers mask that was meant to be worn by an adult, causing it to appear almost comedically large on the boy's head. An orange plastic bag filled with a small amount of candy hung to his side and from a fist. She assumed that it was the Johnson's kid, considering how he was standing in their yard. "Did you want some candy, Robert?" The boy stood completely still and silent and motionless. He simply continued to stare at her with the hollow black eye holes of the mask. Claire never really known Robert to be a talkative boy, so this hardly surprised her. Claire shrugged and shut the door behind her. She then rested the bowl of candy back on the kitchen counter and plopped down onto the cushions of the couch. Just as she found the perfect comfortable position, Mark nudged her. "Would you mind grabbing me another beer?" She glared at him with an exhausted look. "You really have no self-reliance, do you?" Just like many other times in the past, Mark flashed her a pitiful look. "Please," he said in a mocking child's tone. Claire grabbed the empty bottle from his hand and stood up from the couch. "God, you're all unsufferable," she said with a laugh. Claire then walked to the kitchen and threw open the door to the refrigerator, grabbed one bottle, and then figured that she might as well get one for herself. She placed them on the counter and opened the drawer to retrieve the bottle opener. Something caught her attention. Just outside the kitchen window, she saw a shadow fly across the grass on the soft glow of their security light. She leaned in closer to the glass and had just frosted around the edges from the hill of the night air. A few dead leaves tumbled across the grass as she screamed and scanned the yard for the source of movement. Ding dong. Her attention suddenly diverted from the front door. She left a few bottles on the counter and went to grab the bowl of candy once more. As she flung open the front door, she was not greeted with the familiar cheers of small children like any other time that night. Her front doorstep was empty. She glanced at her driveway to find no other one in sight. It was not until she looked under the edge of her lawn that something caught her attention. The boy in the Michael Myers mask was standing near the edge of the bordered Claire's yard. He stood completely still in the green glow of the Halloween lights that emitted from the front landscaping. At this point, Claire knew that this was not the neighbor's kid. Although Robert rarely talked, she knew that he was not the one to pull pranks like this. She attempted to see any details on his face through the holes of the mask, but to no avail. "Look, I don't know who you are, but you either need to take some candy or get out of here." She held out the bowl in his direction. The boy tilted his head down to one side as the Halloween lights changed to a shade of purple, then pivoted on his heels and walked down towards their lawns down the street. He then vanished around the hedge and out of her sight. "Little weirdo," Claire muttered to herself, while opening an almond joy and popping it in her mouth. As she let the candy bowl set it back on the kitchen counter, Mark called her over from his perch in the living room. "Who were you yelling at?" "Just some kid who was standing in the yard. I saw him across the street in the Johnson's yard a few minutes ago." "Well, did you offer him any candy?" "Yeah," Claire responded, while popping the cap off of their beer. "All he did was stare at me and then walked off." "Good thing I'm here to protect you, honey." She rolled her eyes while walking back to the living room. "My ass," Claire said, shoving the beer bottle in his hand. She then toused his hair and then sat down on the couch, with popcorn bowl resting back in her lap. Claire picked up the handful and happily put it in her mouth. She suddenly turned her head to find their dog standing at the back door, waiting to be let in. "Oh, come on." Getting up from her seat once again, Claire dragged her feet back to the door and slid it open. The black lab pranced inside with delight and vanished into the kitchen to search for scraps. While on its wake, a few leaves blew in through the door. Claire quickly rounded them up and tossed them back outside. As she looked out her yard, she noticed the boy in the Michael Myers mask still standing amongst the trees, backed up into the fence. "Hey, what the hell are you doing back here?" There was no response. "Mark, you better get over here." Her husband grunted as he stood from the couch and lumbered over in her direction. Using the doorframe for support, he leaned over and stuck his head outside. "I'll tell you one thing, that isn't the Johnson's boy. Robert is a couple of inches shorter than that and a few pounds heavier." Claire then blew air from her nostrils, pinched the bridge of her nose in frustration. "At this point, I don't care who the hell he is. I just want him out of here. If it means calling the neighborhood security, then so be it." Mark stepped outside with his bare feet smacking against the flagstone patio. He stood right at the edge of where he met the grass. His shadow loomed over the yard as he blocked some light coming from inside the house. "Either you leave or we're calling security. You got that?" The boy stood motionless, and he refused to answer. "Are you deaf or something? Get out of here!" This time the boy moved. He rested the orange candy bag down on the pine straw and opened it. Reaching inside, a black handle of a kitchen knife emerged from the bag. The blade reflected on the moonlight and bounced back into their direction. "Holy shit!" Mark immediately threw his beer bottle straight at the kid. It hurtled through the air before shattering into large chunks against his head. His small body slumped and fell into the ground with a soft thud. "Mark, what the hell is wrong with you?" Claire cried as she ran through the doorway. "You saw that. The kid had a fucking knife. He might have had a concussion now, thanks to you. Do you want to have assault charges brought on us by the kid's parents? I doubt they would do anything to us when they realized that he was carrying a knife around. Just look at the size of that thing." Mark then turned down the boy's direction he pointed. To his shock, the child was gone. All what remained was the brown glass of beer bottles scattered among the landscaping. "Where did he go?" Mark asked, while stumbling backwards towards his house. Claire took a few steps back herself and fumbled with the phone in her pocket. "That's it, I'm calling the cops." Mark followed her back inside and locked the door behind them. As the blue and white colors emitting from the television danced around the room, Claire dialed 911 and spoke with the dispatcher, although at difficult times she managed to keep her panic from seeping in her tone. "They'll have an officer here in about 6 minutes. Her phone suddenly rang, causing her to jump. Looking down at her screen, she was met with the contact photo of her son, dressed up as Dr. Strange, that she had taken from that very afternoon. "Tommy? Hey Mom, I'm almost home. Is it okay if my friends come over in a few minutes and watch some movies? They had to go change because we slipped in mud." At this point, her son's messy clothes were the least of her concerns. "That's fine, dear. Just please hurry home." "All right, see you soon," he said, with delight as the call ended with a beep. Claire then shoved the phone back in her pocket and looked at her husband. Mark was staring out the kitchen window with his nose pressed against the glass. "Any sign of the kid?" "Nothing yet," he said, turning towards the backyard. "It's just like he disappeared into thin air." There was a knock at the door that caused the both of them to jump. Claire breathed a heavy sigh of relief and quickly walked towards the door. She threw it open, greeted with her son, and a sigh of relief as the cool night flooded inside. "I'm so glad you're The doorstep was empty, save for a few bugs that danced around the overhead light. Claire panicked and began frantically looking from side to side. "Tommy?" she called into the cool night air. Stepping forward, she was met with an unsettling crunch under her foot. She slowly looked down to find pieces of plastic cracked under her shoe. She lifted her foot and realized it was the magical shield that had come with Tommy's costume. A knot that formed in her stomach and began to lose her balance. Propping herself against the door frame, she called for her husband. "Mark?" He came barreling down the hallway with an instant. "Is he out there again?" Mark followed his wife's eyes down the ground. Then he saw pieces of shattered plastic resting on the concrete. The color drained from his face. "I'm grabbing my gun." Before Claire could stop him, her husband had fled to the room to retrieve her firearm from the top shelf of the closet. As she watched him disappear around the corner, she heard a noise come from the driveway. It sounded like something falling onto the pavement. She timidly approached the driveway and peered back at the car. She was met with nothing but the sight of the empty sidewalk. She crept closer to the street and was surprised to feel her foot slip onto something. She glanced down and saw a small puddle of blood near the back tire of her SUV. Her shoe had smeared some across of it in the driveway in the dark, crimson streak. Tommy's cell phone lay on the concrete, with the screen cracked. Claire's contact was still pulled up from the phone app. "Mark!" she screamed at the top of her lungs. Within seconds, her husband came in, running through the front door with a pistol in his grasp. As he came closer to her, she pointed at the puddle that illuminated under the sticky yellow glow from the street light. Mark wrapped an arm tightly around his wife, pulled her away from it. He was met with the resistance as she broke from his grasp and ran towards the street. As Claire glanced further down at the sidewalk, she could see a trail of blood that illuminated under the streetlights that dotted their way down to the road. She had felt her head spin, and her knees began to weaken. As soon as she fell to the ground, and began to sob, Mark rushed to her side and bent down to cradle her. "Tommy!" She then continued to scream her son's name into the cool night air, only to have it echo back as if the world was taunting her. As her cries carried up and down the street, hot tears ran down her cheeks. Mark held her tighter, as two of them were bathed in red and blue glow of the approaching police car. The vehicle pulled up to the curb, and the door thrown open as the deputy caught a sight of them. As he approached, Claire's voice continued to pierce the night, only to be lost in the howling wind.